protagonist confronts the antagonist, which we'll talk about in a second, and usually defeats the antagonist. And once the climax is done, then we have the last 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, which is called the epilogue. In French, it's called the denouement. And you'll hear people talk about that in the film industry. They won't say epilogue. They'll talk about the denouement. And that's what that means. It's the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the movie when the hero has returned back to the village having learned something. If you noticed, if you remember from Lord of the Rings, the 4 hobbits were little rascals at the beginning. They were setting off fireworks and stealing Farmer Maggot's carrots and doing all kinds of stuff, just being, kids. After they go on this adventure for a year, when they literally come back to the village, right, and they're sitting in the bar drinking a beer, everybody else is, having fun, yelling and screaming and running around. Those 4 guys are sitting at the table just looking at each other. They're not sitting there going, and remember when you did that? Hey, remember? Yeah, and when you jumped on the back of the dragon? Yeah, remember when the guy No, they're just sitting there looking at each other. They've grown so much and they've learned so much. They don't even have to say it. They just know, just that look that they give each other like, wow, that was an adventure that we went on. And you can see the growth that happened to them over the course of the movie. So that's the 3-act story structure. You could put it in a circle like this, where you say, this is the beginning of the movie, here's the exposition, here's the inciting incident, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the epilogue and the denouement is back here. So here's the village, adventure, back to the village, and then, the hero's back. Sometimes the hero will die, but usually the hero lives and grows from the experience. What's the difference between American movies and foreign movies?
American movies, the hero always, or usually is alive at the end.
Happy ending. Americans love a happy ending. So most American movies have a happy ending. You'll think just when the hero's going to die, then they end up living. Most foreign movies like the idea of a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet, that doesn't have a happy ending. That's English, that's William Shakespeare. German movies, Italian movies, Spanish movies, Japanese, Chinese, most of the rest of the world, they like to see, the hero might or might not live, but they'll have learned something to pass on before they die. Right? Remember we watched Final Fantasy? That's a Japanese movie. In the end, the guy could have come back to life, but nope, he's dead. He dies at the end. All right, so that's the difference. Last thing is there's 3 main parts to this hero's journey. You're always going to find, almost always going to find these characters. The protagonist, pro means in favor of or towards something. So the protagonist is the hero. Anti is against. So the antagonist is against the protagonist. So it's just kind of like this yin-yang symbol over here. What does yin-yang mean? Equal, balanced, right? If I was to fill that in, one of those little teardrop things would be black with a white dot, and the other one would be white with a black dot. And that's a very ancient Chinese symbol that signifies the balance of nature, that for everything there's an opposite. So when you look at different things, you're going to see opposite fire and ice, right? They're opposites. Male and female, opposites. Night and day. Hot and cold. Black and white. For almost everything you can think of, there's an opposite to it, and you need both of those to make a whole being. So in this case, we need an antagonist to help the protagonist grow. Because if there's nobody to stop the protagonist, then what's he going to learn? If there's no obstacles in his way, then he's sitting on a beach drinking a pina colada. He's not going to learn anything, and it's a boring movie, right? So we want to see those conflicts as it goes along, and we want to see the hero learning. That's called the character arc. Remember that? What the character learns as he goes. So the antagonist is the person who's trying to stop the protagonist from accomplishing his or her goal. I put up here villain, but is the antagonist always a villain? No. Sometimes the antagonist is just the person or entity trying to stop the hero from accomplishing his goal. Remember when we watched The Walk to Remember? The father of Mandy Moore was a nice guy, but he was trying to stop Shane West at every corner. He was just trying, no, you can't date my daughter, no, no, no. Until finally Shane West kind of won him over and said, I really do have your daughter's best interest in mind. And then he kind of backed off a little bit. And then there's usually a wizard. Because the protagonist is supposed to be a person like us because we're supposed to relate to the protagonist. So the protagonist needs someone to help them because they're going to make mistakes, they're going to falter, they're going to need advice. And so there's usually a character that we call, like we call the village, you know, we call it the wizard. It's not necessarily a wizard, but it's somebody who is a mentor, a guide, a teacher, who is a friend, a best friend, who's going to help the protagonist figure out how to take the next step. Okay? In Lord of the Rings, the wizard is really a wizard. It's Gandalf. Gandalf is the one who helps Frodo. He's got a lot of friends, but Gandalf is the main wizard. In The Wizard of Oz, who's the wizard? No. Right? Who's the Wizard of Oz? He's the guy that we see at the very end of the movie who doesn't help him out at all. Right? He's the guy behind the curtain. Who helps Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz?
And the North of the North. Witch of the North.
Which one?
The Good Witch.
Yeah, the Good Witch, Glenda, the Good Witch of the North. She's the one who says, here, take the slippers, follow the yellow brick road. You know, when she passes out in the poppy field, wakes her up. You know, she's the one who guides her through the entire process. So Glenda is the wizard in the wizard. Sometimes it's the best friend. If you ever saw a movie called Mr. 3000 with Bernie Mac, you ever see that? He's got this friend who's just a, you know, just a kind of a weird guy, but he'll say something, and Bernie Mac will say, what are you saying? And he goes, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, you know, and he puts these ideas in Bernie Mac's head about which way he should be going, kind of a guidance. But that's his big thing. Have you ever heard people say that? I'm not saying, I'm just saying, you know. And it's kind of a subtle thing. So the wizard is the person who, or entity or whatever, that helps the hero to try and accomplish that goal. So that's basically the hero's journey, and it all works out most of the time. If you have a movie like Pulp Fiction, and you look at that and you think, oh, that doesn't follow that. It really does. All Quentin Tarantino did was he took a movie, and then he just took blocks of it and switched them around. You know, because he could have taken those and put them back in order again, and it would have been a perfectly normal, chronological movie. But it kind of was shocking to see in one scene John Travolta gets shot, and then 20 minutes later he's driving in a car with Samuel Jackson, and you go like, I thought he got shot. What, you know? And it's because the time frame is all messed up. But most movies have these elements. I saw a movie the other day called the Tunnel Rats that didn't. A kind of very strange movie. It's about the Vietnam War and these guys, the Americans that would go down into these Vietnamese tunnels, like this big around, and all they'd have is a flashlight and a gun, a .45 pistol. And they'd have to crawl on their hands and knees down these tunnels that they don't know what's around the next corner, but they know that there's Vietnamese down there. And they'd come around the corner and there might be a little room that has a couple beds in it, or a little hospital where they're taking care of some sick people, or a little command center. And then there's like a shootout. You know, could you imagine how scary that would be? Well, the whole movie, I thought this will be interesting. Starts off with about 15 soldiers and about 4 or 5 Vietnamese, and it's kind of following their stories, but there's no protagonist. There's nobody that it really keys on. It's kind of like treating everybody equally. And as the movie progresses, this guy dies. This guy dies. This guy dies. This guy dies. Horrible deaths. I mean, you know, one guy pops his head out of a tunnel, and a girl is there with a bamboo spike, and she sticks it right through his neck, you know, and then leaves, and the guy's head is just sticking above ground. So, I mean, there's all these grisly ways. Everyone dies. By the end of the movie, you know, you're thinking, okay, whoever's left standing, it must be the protagonist. No one. Everyone in the movie dies. And that's the end of the movie. So it's like, okay, I mean, all that shows is how violent and horrible that situation was in Vietnam. But there's no protagonist. So that's kind of a little bit different. Most movies aren't like that. What?
Was it good?
It was entertaining if you like a lot of blood and guts. But anyway, most movies aren't like that. Most movies have what we just talked about with the hero's journey and the 3-act story structure. All right?